Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you with us today as we decode the often invisible forces that literally shape our daily lives. Look, we live in a world just overflowing with really complex debates, right? Debates about jobs, taxes, inequality, and the whole future of work. But to truly understand what's going on beneath the surface, we have to look through a very specific lens. So today, we're going to explore the fascinating intersection of raw economics, our deeply held societal values, and one of the most hotly debated policy proposals of our time, universal basic income. But right out of the gate, I want to hook you with the question, can economists predict the future? It's a question that naturally pops into your head when you see experts on the news giving these super precise forecasts about next month's interest rates or an impending stock market crash. I mean, think about it. If they truly possessed a crystal ball, wouldn't they be billionaires sipping mojitos on a private island somewhere rather than going on television? The truth is, a whole lot of what we think we know about economics is actually a massive misconception. So let's dive into this and clear things up. Okay, so here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by looking at what economics actually isn't. Then we'll break down the crucial difference between positive and normative economics. After that, we'll see exactly how values shape policy. And finally, we'll apply all of this to evaluate the universal basic income model. Let's jump right into Section 1, what economics actually isn't. You know, the great artist Michelangelo once joked that sculpting David was easy. He simply chipped away all the parts of the stone that didn't look like David. We're going to do the exact same thing here. To find out what economics is, we first have to chisel away what it's not. First off, it is definitely not psychology. It doesn't try to map the inner workings of the human mind or figure out why you specifically prefer tea over coffee. Second, it's not an ideology. It's completely neutral. It describes what happens, it doesn't prescribe what you should believe. Third, it is not ethics. It might explain why a hedge fund manager earns more than a teacher, but it absolutely does not declare which profession is morally superior. Fourth, as we just touched on, it's not a crystal ball. It offers us pattern predictions and clarity, but certainly not clairvoyance. And finally, it is not a tool for social engineering. In fact, economics teaches us humility about how incredibly little we can actually design from the top down. Once you strip away all those myths, you hit a core concept that critics misunderstand all the time: rationality. Now, in economics, being rational doesn't mean humans are omniscient, emotionless, Vulcan-like robots, perfectly calculating every single move. Not at all. It simply means that people are purposive. We have goals, whether those goals are financial, spiritual, or just wanting to spend more time with family. And we act intentionally to achieve them, using the best means we have available. And because people are inherently goal-oriented, they respond to incentives. And this brilliantly illustrates how incentives work in the real world, mandating seatbelts. Now, I know that sounds completely counterintuitive, right? But changing the rules shifts the hidden costs and benefits people face. Wearing a seatbelt actually lowers the personal cost of reckless driving simply because the driver feels safer. This can inadvertently incentivize faster driving, meaning while the driver might survive an accident, the poor pedestrian they hit might not. Economics forces us to look at these unseen secondary outcomes. Which brings us to a super famous observation by the grandfather of economics, Adam Smith. He pointed out that we don't get our dinner because the butcher or the baker is acting out of pure, selfless charity, but because they're pursuing their own self-interest. Now, this isn't economics endorsing greed, not by a long shot. It's just a description of how market institutions naturally translate self-interest into widespread well-being. I mean, think of an entrepreneur like Steve Jobs. He probably started Apple to amass personal wealth, sure, but the only way he could actually do that in a market economy was by creating amazing, innovative products that served the needs of millions of other people. All right, moving on to Section 2, positive versus normative economics. This clear-eyed observation of how the world really works leads us directly to a core bedrock framework in economics: separating facts from feelings. Positive economics is grounded entirely in certainty, data, and cause and effect. It simply asks what actually is. It's totally objective and testable. Normative economics, on the flip side, is completely subjective. It's based on our personal values, perspectives, and ideologies. It asks what ought to be. And you can't test that with a simple data set because it relies on our own ethical judgments. Let's look at how this plays out with a real-world issue that we hear about all the time. A positive economic statement would be, raising the minimum wage leads to higher unemployment among low-skilled workers. That is a descriptive, testable claim based purely on supply and demand. But a normative statement on that exact same topic would be, we should raise the minimum wage to improve living standards. Notice that key word there, should. That relies entirely on a societal value judgment about fairness and human dignity. And that takes us to Section 3, how values actually shape policy. That distinction between positive and normative is absolutely vital, because while positive economics explains the nuts and bolts of an economy, it is our normative value judgments that actually drive the policies our governments choose to implement. Think about it. Every major government policy is rooted in a subjective societal value. If a society decides it heavily values reducing wealth inequality, boom, they implement progressive taxation. If a community highly values environmental sustainability, they're going to willingly accept the economic costs of strict industry regulations. Valuing equal access to care, that drives the creation of universal healthcare systems. The exact same logic goes for agricultural subsidies to protect rural towns or tariffs to protect domestic jobs. Economics doesn't tell a society they must do any of these things. The society decides what it cares about first and then uses economic tools to try and make it happen. So if you take nothing else away from this, remember this crucial point. Economics is ideologically neutral. It merely tells us what trade-offs we face when we make a decision. It is our subjective human values that dictate whether those trade-offs are actually worth making. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, the UBI case study. So now that we have this framework firmly in mind, separating the pure mechanics of economics from the subjective values of society, let's apply it to universal basic income. First things first, we need a solid positive definition. Universal Basic Income, or UBI, is an unconditional, lifelong monthly cash payment from the state. It goes to everyone, literally from birth to death, with zero preconditions, no job search requirements, and no complex bureaucratic applications. It is designed to cover the basic sociocultural subsistence minimum. And crucially, in its absolute purest form, it is meant to completely replace the entire bloated social welfare state as we currently know it. So why is this specific idea gaining so much incredible momentum right now? Well, we are entering the artificial intelligence era. Rapid technological change, automation, robotics, they are actively eliminating traditional jobs. And this creates a very legitimate fear of severe polarization between the people who own the capital, like the robots and the AI, and the everyday labor force. That threatens our basic social cohesion. This growing divide naturally triggers a massive debate about how we should tax this bizarre new reality. You'll often hear some politicians suggest a robot tax to protect human jobs, but positive economics steps in and tells us that taxing robots directly is highly inefficient. It distorts relative prices, it slows down technological progress, and it ultimately hurts a country's global competitiveness. A much, much more efficient economic response is to tax the value-added output at the very end of the production process. You don't tax the robot itself, you tax the wealth the robot generates when it finally reaches the shareholders and capital owners, and then you use that wealth to fund the social safety net. And let me tell you, the resources we are talking about here are massive. $900 billion euros. That is the size of the current annual public budget for the social welfare state in Germany alone. The money is already in play. It's just currently circulating through this highly complex, often incredibly inefficient bureaucracy of conditional aid, unemployment insurances, and a web of various subsidies. Finally, Section 5, Evaluating the UBI model. So the question is, can we apply that massive pool of resources more efficiently? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how simple math creates a perfectly progressive tax system. Imagine a UBI of 12,000 euros a year, funded by a flat 50% tax on all earned gross income. If you earn zero, you pay zero tax and you receive the 12,000 euro UBI. So your net income is 12,000. If you earn 24,000, you pay 12,000 in tax, but you get 12,000 back in UBI, meaning you break exactly even. But look down at the bottom row. If you earn 240,000 euros, you pay 120,000 in tax, you still get your 12,000 UBI check, but your net tax burden is 108,000. Even with a flat tax rate, the system naturally redistributes wealth from the top down to the bottom. It's mathematically fascinating. If you divide that 12,000 euros by 12 months, you get a solid 1,000 euros a month. Based on current expenditures, a 1,000 euro monthly UBI is financially plausible right now in a country like Germany without even raising overall spending. However, remember our framework. Positive economics can only show us the math. Setting that exact subsistence level, deciding as a culture if 1,000 euros is too much or maybe too little, that remains a purely normative political decision for society to debate. From a strict economic standpoint, the brilliance of a UBI is that it totally separates the allocation of income from the distribution of income. It frees up the labor market to be as efficient and productive as it can possibly be without burdening it with all these social policy tasks. At the exact same time, it provides an unconditional safety net for everyone. Theoretically, this empowers people to take risks, start new businesses, and innovate, knowing for sure they won't fall into total destitution. We've chipped away the myths today. We've looked at the objective math, and we've explored the massive trade-offs of replacing a conditional welfare state with an unconditional one. But as we've learned, economics cannot make the final choice for us. So I'm going to leave you with this. Knowing the positive economic realities and the trade-offs involved, what do your own normative value judgments tell you about universal basic income? Is this the right path forward for our society? Take that question with you and keep exploring. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.